Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today we're gonna have a look at the Jaenisch Gambit, which is a very strange, very rare opening that I have faced yesterday, and that's why I've decided to cover it. It's not in the English playlist, or it hasn't been up until now, and it's an opening we simply have to go through. So c4, b5. It makes no sense on first glance because it's a clean pawn. White wins a clean pawn if white decides to take. On the other hand, there's a very clear idea behind the Jaenisch Gambit, and the idea is, similarly to what happens in the Benko and in the Sicilian as well, and in many central gambits, you are fighting for control over a certain square. In this case, black is fighting for d5. And when white plays the English, white wants to control d5 with more than just the c-pawn. The idea behind c4 usually involves knight c3 and bishop g2. So you have, the knight on c3 and the bishop on g2 and the pawn on c4 all fighting for d5. And later on in English, white may wish to play d4 at some point. But one of the main ideas is to prevent d5.
If you're like me and you think practicing against the engine is boring because it either crushes you or plays like an idiot, try playing against Nocti. Nocti is a human-like AI that's going to adapt to your strength, is going to play like a human, try to trick you like a human, and challenge you on your own level. The first thing you can do is, of course, assess your rating, and you can play a rating test against Nocti. Yeah, the only move is g4 and then queen f4 mate? Yeah. Good. Yes! 2557! Come on! It's going to tell you your strength, but there are many, many more features. The first thing is, when you play Nocti, you get instant feedback, and all of your moves will get sort of color-coded. Nocti will immediately tell you if you made a mistake. That way you can ask Nocti to see where you went wrong. You can play games in openings you're trying to learn. So you can import any repertoire you want and play Nocti in that specific opening. Just go to one of my favorite features, if not my favorite one, and the one I use the most, is themes. So you can play Nocti in any specific position you choose. So if you go to your themes, you can see that I've made quite a few. So let's say you want to play out this position. This is a position from Spassky's game where he triangulated perfectly. If you're trying to practice something, you can create a new theme, just add an FEN or a PGN and play it out against Nocti. That way, if you have an endgame you would like to practice, you don't have to find an actual human to play against, nor will you have to play against a 2800 engine or against a 500 engine human. If you would like to check Nocti out, you can follow the link in the description, and if you would like to get a 64% discount, use the code Hanging Pawns.
When black plays b5, the Jaenisch Gambit, you're not controlling d5 anymore. And we're going to cover everything that white can do and all the black responses after that. But I just want to say at the beginning of this, white needs to take the pawn. We are going to cover declining the capture first. So there are several ways to decline it, but there is only one sensible way to do that, which is to play e3. When white plays e3 or e4 or b3, any other move that doesn't lose the c-pawn, white's immediately worse. Why is that? Well, let's take this line for example: bc4, bishop c4, d5. Okay, you have to retreat the bishop. Let's say you choose b3, it doesn't really matter. e6, knight f3, c5. Look at black's center. Black has traded the b-pawn for the c-pawn and managed to gain control over the entire center of the board. So that's not something we wish to do. And if we're going to give away control of d5, we have to get something in return. So white should take that pawn. The Jaenisch Gambit needs to be accepted. Okay, takes. Now, you might be wondering, well, apart from controlling d5, what's the idea of the Jaenisch Gambit? What's the upside? There isn't one. The gambit is awful for black. If white knows what they're doing, they're going to have a clean extra pawn with enough central control to compensate for d5. Okay, we're going to have a look at the main line. You couldn't really call it the main line because there have been 15 master games played altogether. I can tell you what people play on Lichess. On Lichess, the most common move here is a6 with 74,000 games, and that's followed by bishop to b7 with 19,000 games, and then d5, knight f6, e5, and c6. So people play different things. However, a6 is by far the most common move. It's a full pawn gambit, and if we have a brief look at the Benko, let's just put the Benko on the board. So c4, c5, d5, b5. If white accepts the Benko, black plays a6. And the idea behind the fully accepted Benko gambit for black is that black is going to recapture bishop a6 and get rapid development along with the two open files, the A and B files. So in the Benko, black usually gets the bishop to g7, puts some pressure on the diagonal, the rooks come to a8, b8, the queen comes to b6. If white ever plays e4, black gets to misplace the king. So that's the Benko idea behind this. And the same goes for the wing gambit in the Sicilian and the Mengarini Sicilian. So e4, c5. If white goes a3, that's not a full gambit immediately. But if white goes b4, the wing gambit, the idea is pretty much the same. Takes and a3. So white has done the same thing, the Jaenisch Gambit with colors reversed, removing black's c-pawn from the board in order to be able to play d4. So the Jaenisch Gambit, I would say the closest resemblance is to the wing gambit in the Sicilian and the Benko Gambit. Okay. So c4, b5, white takes, black plays a6. Now, personally, I don't think the a-pawn should be taken, although that is the most common move by far on Lichess. In master games, people have played other things, although ba6 is the most common once again. I think if you're going to speed up black's development, you need to ask yourself why. In this case, by taking on a6, you're making sure that you keep the pawn whatever happens. However, if you take on a6, then black recaptures with the bishop, and you have the Benko situation where if you ever move your e-pawn forward, and you're going to want to do that because black's going to go d5, black's going to take on f1, misplacing your king, and this is exactly what black wants. This is what black wants. So when black plays the Jaenisch Gambit, they want you to take on a6. So we're not going to do that. As white, I would recommend that you play e3 or e4. The moves have a very similar idea of simply defending the b-pawn and continuing our own development instead of helping black out. So the best move, I think, is e3. Now, if ab5 isn't played now by black, we are going to take on a6. And if black recaptures with the bishop, we can trade that bishop off. And our king is still on e1, we can safely castle, and so on. So black should take. Now this has been played once, in one game, white won. The game went bishop b5, black played c6, the bishop retreated to e2. These are all the best moves. And now, in the game, black played knight f6, which is suboptimal, e5 is the best move. And one thing that I would like to mention here for white, black's going to want to go e4 and d5. That's usually the way to compensate for the pawn. But we're going to go knight f3 anyway. And when the pawn advances to e4, we go knight d4. And after d5, we start the undermining Scheveningen style. White is basically playing a Sicilian in reverse. It's a Sicilian Scheveningen with the knight on d4 instead of f3. And we are immediately challenging the pawn on e4, the pawn in the center. Unlike in the Benko, our A and B pawns are very safe, and we haven't sped up black's development, so all of black's pieces are still on the back rank. We have a lead in development, so there's no typical Benko compensation that they normally get. So my advice to you would be, if you play black, do not play the Jaenisch Gambit. It's not a good opening. You might get good positions, but if you follow what I've just shown you as white, you will always be better, and as black, you will always be worse. So you take on b5. If they play a6, you play e3 or e4. e4 is slightly more committal, but it does have the upside of simply controlling d5. So I would recommend e3. If black doesn't take, you take on a6. If they do take, you recapture with the bishop. Now, they don't have to play c6, but most people will. You continue with bishop e2, bring the bishop back. They can play knight f6 or e5 or d5, it doesn't really matter. Your next move is knight f3. This is the best case scenario for white. It's a +1 advantage. White is significantly better, has a clean extra pawn. Now, instead of e3, white can also play e4, which is fine, according to the engine, just a slightly smaller advantage compared to e3. Because after knight f6, you now have to play knight c3. You don't really want to go d3 because you want to recapture on b5 with the bishop, so takes. Bishop b7, and now d3, once the bishop has come out of the pawn chain, is fine. You can also play f3, which I wouldn't recommend, and you can play queen e2, which I think is the best move. And now again, you have a clean extra pawn. Black needs to fight against d4, so if black doesn't play e5 now, you do play d4, and now you have everything. You have the center, you have an extra pawn, you have great development, a lead in development, and your position is perfect. Now let us have a look at what happens if black doesn't play a6. Black has a couple of alternatives, which are definitely less good than a6. a6 is the only move that makes the gambit worthwhile. People have played bishop b7, g6, and e5. So after bishop b7, I would recommend that you play the best move, which is knight f3. The reason knight f3 is the best move is it prevents e5. Okay, so d5 you cannot prevent after bishop b7. If you go e4, black's just going to take. But we can prevent e5. In order for black to play e5, they would have to take on f3, which is among the best engine moves, but it's awful, giving away that bishop. So when they play g6, for example, we can now go e3 or d4. I would recommend starting with d4, and after knight f6, simply knight c3, followed by e3. A very simple setup where our b pawn is overprotected. As soon as they play c6 or a6, we're going to take. If they play d5, the bishop is blocked. No trouble at all. So bishop e7, easy to deal with. If they go g6 straight away, we're going to treat it the same way, except that we will not be playing knight f3, even though it's a good move, because bishop g7 reinforces e5 straight away. I would recommend starting with knight c3 here to sort of play against d5. And after bishop to g7, d4, bishop to b7, e4. Now you see the upside of knight c3 compared to knight f3. The knight on c3 defends e4, so when the other bishop inevitably comes to the diagonal, you can play e4 and claim the center. So again, not an issue. There are many things black could do from here, but none of them are really scary. I would recommend not playing f3. So if, for example, knight f6, I would recommend the move e5 or bishop d3. f3 is fine according to the engine, but after e5, knight d5, I mean, you would love it if black took on c3. You would have 4 pawns in the center. Just go knight f3. I don't know what black does, but let's assume that they castle. Now we can go bishop c4. I don't even want to comment on this position. It's not just that white has an extra pawn, but white has a significantly better position as well. And the final move I want to have a look at once you take the pawn is e5, which I think is the most challenging move from a human perspective. It's also one of the best engine moves immediately after a6. Now, this pawn needs to be prevented from moving forward, and we are going to have to defend the pawn at some point, so e4 is what I would recommend. After knight f6, e4 is hanging, so knight c3. And when bishop b7 is played, now we have an interesting choice. We can passively defend the e-pawn, which I don't think is good. If I'm going to be honest, if you play something like d3, the engine says white's still better, but there's no need to do that. I would recommend the move knight f3. challenging their e5 pawn. And if they passively defend it with a move like d6, then the bishop is blocked. And we can continue with a move like queen c2. So this is perfectly fine. Now they have a very bad bishop. They're going to be playing a King's Indian basically with the pawn on e5, which we know it's not good. So most people are going to either play queen e7, which is less committal, but again it restricts the bishop plus 2.5 according to the engine, or they're simply going to trade. And this is the only reasonably dangerous sequence white needs to remember. You take on e4, bishop takes e4, and then you can take on e5, because on queen e7, after d4 and d6, you have queen e2, and you're defending everything. After d5, queen takes e4, e takes d4, queen e7, bishop e7. It may seem like we have given the pawn back, but there is no way for them to keep the material, because we go bishop f4, and one of these two pawns is hanging, either after castles long or simply rook c1. If they try something like, I don't know, king d7, then the immediate castle's queenside is game over. Something like castle's queenside, bishop f6 to defend, followed by g3, and bishop g2 is going to be the end of the game. So even though we have temporarily given the pawn back, we have so much piece activity that black is losing. So to sum up, if you're an English opening player and you face the Jaenisch Gambit or the Wing Gambit in reverse, you have to take it. On a6, you shouldn't take it, and I'm going to show you why in a second. So if you do take that pawn, bishop takes a6, again, problems on f1, and black has the initiative. So what you should do, instead of taking on a6, is go e3 or e4, defending the pawn, forcing black to take, speeding up your own development as opposed to you giving black extra developing moves. That's it. Now I feel calmer because I've covered an opening that was missing in the English playlist. It's a bad opening, but it still had to be mentioned. I did win my game yesterday against the Jaenisch Gambit, but I actually took on a6 and I was struggling. So I took some time to learn it. Let me know what you think. If you have any suggestions, comments, leave them below. And thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.